Hi guys, I thought tonight we'll celebrate Tolkien Reading Day. Get nice and comfy in my Hobbit cosplay. I'm dressed as Bilbo Baggins and I thought we'd read The Hobbit because this seems slightly less ambitious than trying to get through all of Lord of the Rings or the Silmarillion. I don't know how far we're going to get tonight. I'm just going to kick off. Please treat this as your little bedtime story and come join us. Happy Tolkien Reading Day, everyone. Just a reminder before we kick off, we do have our Simpsons quiz tomorrow. We do a live stream every single Sunday, 7 PM UK time. This week's theme is The Simpsons. Hello! Right, let's... Wow, you guys are spamming the likes. Thank you. Thank you, Eves. Eve? Is that Eve? Hi. Right, let's kick off, otherwise we'll be here all night. I don't know how far we're going to get, and I apologize, I'm not the best public reader, and yes, you get to see my Hobbit feet. In a hole in the ground, there lived a Hobbit. Not a nasty, dirty, wet hole filled with ends of worms and an oozy smell. Nor yet a dry, bare, sandy hole with nothing in it to sit down or eat. It was a hobbit hole, and that means comfort. It had a perfectly round door, like a porthole, painted green, with a shiny yellow brass knob in the exact middle. The door opened onto a tube-shaped hall like a tunnel, a very comfortable tunnel, without smoke, with panelled walls and floors tiled and carpeted, provided with polished chairs, and lots of pegs for hats and coats. The Hobbit was fond of visitors. The tunnel wound on and on, going fairly, but not quite straight, into the side of the hill. The hill, as all the people for many miles around called it, and many little doors opened out of it, first on one side and then on the other. No going upstairs for the Hobbit. Bedrooms, bathrooms, cellars, pantries, lots of these. Wardrobes. He had whole rooms devoted to clothes. Kitchens, dining rooms, all were on the same floor, and indeed on the same passage. The best rooms were all on the left-hand side, going in, for these were the only ones to have windows, deep-set round windows looking over his garden and meadows beyond, sloping down into the river. This Hobbit was a very well-to-do Hobbit, and his name was Baggins. The Bagginses had lived in the neighbourhood of the hill for time out of mind, and people considered them very respectable, not only because most of them were very rich, but also because they never had any adventures or did anything unexpected. You could tell what a Baggins would say on any question without the bother of asking him. This is a story of how a Baggins had an adventure and found himself doing and saying things altogether unexpected. He may have lost the neighbours' respect, but he gained, well, you will see whether he gained anything in the end. The mother of our particular Hobbit. What is a Hobbit? I suppose Hobbits need some description nowadays, since they have become rare and shy of the big people, as they call us. They are, or were, a little people, about half our height, and smaller than the bearded dwarves. Hobbits have no beards. There is little or no magic about them, except the ordinary everyday sort which helps them to disappear quietly and quickly when large stupid folk like you and me come blundering along, making a noise like elephants, which they can hear a mile off. They are inclined to be fat in the stomach. They dress in bright colours, chiefly green and yellow. wear no shoes because their feet grow natural leathery soles and thick warm brown hair like the stuff on their heads, which is curly. Have long clever brown fingers, good-natured faces, and laugh deep fruity laughs, especially after dinner, which they have twice a day when they can get it. Now you know enough to go on with. As I was saying, the mother of this hobbit, of Bilbo Baggins that is, was the famous Belladonna Took, one of the 3 remarkable daughters of the old Took, head of the hobbits who lived across the water, the small river that ran at the foot of the hill. It was often said in other families that long ago one of the Took ancestors must have taken a fairy wife. That was, of course, absurd, but certainly was still something not entirely hobbit-like about them, and once in a while members of the Took clan would go and have adventures. They discreetly disappeared, and the family hushed it up, but the fact remained that the Tooks were not as respectable as the Bagginses, though they were undoubtedly richer. Not that Belladonna Took ever had any adventures after she became Mrs. Bungo Baggins. Bungo, that was Bilbo's father, built the most luxurious hobbit hole for her, and partly with her money. That was to be found either under the hill or over the hill, or across the water, and there they remained to the end of their days. Still, it is probable that Bilbo, her only son, although he looked and behaved exactly like a second edition of his solid and comfortable father, got something a bit queer in his make-up from the Took side, something that only waited for a chance to come out. The chance never arrived until Bilbo Baggins was grown up. Being about 50 years old or so, and living in the beautiful hobbit hole built by his father, which I have just described for you, until he had in fact apparently settled down immovably. By some curious chance, one morning long ago in the quiet of the world, when there was less noise and more green, and the hobbits were still numerous and prosperous, and Bilbo Baggins was standing at his door after breakfast, smoking an enormous long wooden pipe that reached nearly down to his woolly toes, neatly brushed. Gandalf came by. Gandalf! If you had heard only a quarter of what I've heard about him, and I have only heard very little of all there is to hear, you would be prepared for any sort of remarkable tale. Tales and adventures sprouted up all over the place wherever he went, in the most extraordinary fashion. I keep slipping into the West Country accent. It's impossible not to slip into it when you're reading The Hobbit. He had not been down that way under the hill for ages and ages, not since his friend the old Took died, in fact, and the hobbits had almost forgotten what he looked like. He had been over the hill and across the water on business of his own since they were all small hobbit boys and hobbit girls. All that the unsuspecting Bilbo saw that morning was an old man with a staff. He had a tall, pointed blue hat, a long grey cloak, a silver scarf over which his white long beard hung down below his waist, and immense black boots. "Good morning," said Bilbo, and he meant it. The sun was shining, and the grass was very green. But Gandalf looked at him from under long bushy brows that stuck out further than the brim of his shady hat. "What do you mean?" he said. "Do you wish me a good morning? Or mean that it is a good morning whether I want it or not? Or that you feel good this morning? Or that it is a morning to be good on?" "All of them at once, I suppose," said Bilbo, "and a very fine morning for a pipe of tobacco out of doors, into the bargain. If you have a pipe about you, sit down and have a fill of mine. There's no hurry, we all have the day before us." Then Bilbo sat down on a seat by his door, crossed his legs, and blew out a beautiful grey ring of smoke that sailed up into the air without breaking and floated away over the hill. "Very pretty," said Gandalf, "but I have no time to blow smoke rings this morning. I am looking for someone to share in an adventure that I am arranging, and it's very difficult to find anyone. I should think so. In these parts, we are plain quiet folk and have no use for adventures. Nasty, disturbing, uncomfortable things. Make you late for dinner. I can't think what anybody sees in them, said our Mr. Baggins, and stuck one thumb behind his braces and blew out another even bigger smoke ring. Then he took out his morning letters and began to read, pretending to take no more notice of the old man. He had decided that he was not quite his sort, and wanted him to go away. But the old man did not move. He stood leaning on his stick and gazing at the Hobbit without saying anything, till Bilbo got quite uncomfortable and even a little cross. "Good morning," he said at last. "We don't want any adventures here, thank you. You might try over the hill or across the water." By this, he meant that the conversation was at an end. "What a lot of things you do use good morning for," said Gandalf. "Now you mean that you want to get rid of me, and that it won't be good until I move off." Not at all, my dear sir. Let me see. I don't think I know your name." Yes, my dear sir, and I do know your name, Mr. Bilbo Baggins, and you do know my name, though you don't remember that I belong to it. I am Gandalf, and Gandalf means me. To think that I should have lived to be good morning by Belladonna Took's son, as if I was selling buttons at the door." Gandalf! Good gracious me! Not the wandering wizard that gave old Took a pair of magic diamond studs that fastened themselves and never came undone till ordered. Not the fellow who used to tell wonderful tales at parties about dragons and goblins and giants and the rescue of princesses and the unexpected luck of widows' sons. Not the man that used to make such particularly excellent fireworks. I remember those. Old Took used to have them on at Midsummer's Eve. Splendid! They used to go up like lilies and snapdragons and laburnums and of fire and hang in the twilight all evening. You will notice already that Mr. Baggins was not so prosy as he liked to believe, also that he was very fond of flowers. "Dear me," he went on, "not the Gandalf who was responsible for so many quiet lads and lasses going off into the blue for mad adventures, anything from climbing trees to visiting elves or sailing in ships, sailing to other shores. Bless me, life used to be quite you used to upset things badly in these parts once upon a time. I beg your pardon, I had no idea you were still in business." "And where else should I be?" said the wizard. "All the same, I am pleased to find you remember something about me. You seem to remember my fireworks kindly, at any rate." I think my Santa voice and my Gandalf voice are the same voice. You see, that comment took me off guard. Sorry. It's Tolkien reading day. Don't ruin this with your smut. "You seem to remember my fireworks kindly, at any rate, and that is not without hope. Indeed, for your old grandfather Took's sake, and for the sake of poor Belladonna, I will give you what you asked for." "I beg your pardon, I haven't asked for anything." "Yes, you have. Twice now. My pardon. I give it to you. In fact, I will go as far as to send you on this adventure. Very amusing for me, very good for you, and profitable too, very likely, if you ever got over it." "Sorry, I don't want any adventures, thank you. Not today. Good morning. But please come to tea, anytime you like." "Why not tomorrow? Come tomorrow. Goodbye." With that, the Hobbit turned and scuttled inside his round green door, and shut it as quickly as he dared, not to seem rude. Yeah, Hobbits are quintessentially British, aren't they? Wizards are, after all, wizards. "What on earth did I ask him to tea for?" he said to himself as he went to the pantry. He had only just had breakfast, but he thought a cake or two and a drink or something would do him good after this fright. Gandalf, in the meantime, was still quietly standing outside the door, and laughing long but quietly. After a while he stepped up and with the spike on his staff scratched a queer sign on the Hobbit's beautiful green front door. Then he strode away, just about the time when Bilbo was finishing his second cake and beginning to think that he'd escaped adventures very well. The next day, he'd almost entirely forgotten about Gandalf. He did not remember things very well, unless he put them down on his engagement tablet. Like this: Gandalf tea Wednesday. Yesterday, he'd been too flustered to do anything of the kind. Just before tea time, there came a tremendous ring on the front doorbell, and then he remembered. He rushed and put on the kettle, and put on another cup and saucer, and an extra cake or two, and ran to the door. "I'm so sorry to keep you waiting," he was going to say, when he saw that it was not Gandalf at all. It was a dwarf, with a blue beard tucked into a golden belt, and very bright eyes under his dark green hood. As soon as the door was opened, he pushed inside, just as if he had been expected. He hung his hooded cloak on the nearest peg, and said, "Dwalin, at your service," he said with a low bow. "Bilbo Baggins, at yours," said the Hobbit, too surprised to ask any questions for the moment. When the silence that followed had become uncomfortable, he said, "I'm just about to make tea. Pray come and have some with me." A little stiff, perhaps, but he meant it kindly. "And what would you do if an uninvited dwarf came and hung up his things in your hall without a word of explanation?" They had not been at a table for long, in fact. They had hardly reached the third cake when there came another, even louder ring at the bell. "Excuse me," said the Hobbit, and he went off to the door. "So you've got here at last!" That was what he was going to say to Gandalf this time. But it was not Gandalf. In fact, there was a very old-looking dwarf on the step, with a white beard and a scarlet hood, and he too hopped inside as soon as the door was open, just as if he'd been invited. "I see they have begun to arrive already," he said, when he caught sight of Dwalin's green hood hanging up. He hung his red one next to it, and said, "Balin, at your service," he said with his hand on his breast. "Thank you," said Bilbo with a gasp. It was not the correct thing to say, but "they have begun to arrive" had flustered him badly. He liked visitors, but he liked to know them before they arrived, and he preferred to ask them himself. He had a horrible thought that the cakes might run short, and then he, as the host, he knew his duty, and stuck to it, however painful he might have to go without. "Come along in and have some tea," he managed to say after taking a deep breath. "A little beer would suit me better, if it was all the same to you, my good sir," said Balin with the white beard. "But I don't mind some cake. Seed cake if you have any." "Lots," Bilbo found himself answering, to his own surprise, and he found himself scuttling off to the cellar to fill a pint mug with beer, and then to a pantry to fetch 2 beautiful round seed cakes, which he had baked that afternoon for his after-supper morsel. When he got back, Balin and Dwalin were talking at the table like old friends. As a matter of fact, they were brothers. Bilbo plumped down the beer and the cake in front of them, and when a loud ring came at the bell again, and then another ring. Gandalf for certain this time, he thought, as he puffed along the passage. But it was not. It was 2 more dwarves, both with blue hoods, silver belts, and yellow beards. I wish they kept the colourful designs for the movies. And each of them carried a bag of tools and a spade. In they hopped, and as soon as the door began to open, Bilbo was hardly surprised at all. "What can I do for you, my dwarves?" he said. "Killy, at your service," said the one. "And Filly," added the other, and they both swept off their blue hoods and bowed. "At yours and your families," replied Bilbo, remembering his manners this time. "Dwalin and Balin already here, I see," said Killy. "Let us join the throng." "Throng?" said Mr. Baggins. "I don't like the sound of that. I really must sit down for a minute and collect my wits and have a drink." He'd only just had a sip in the corner while the 4 dwarves sat around the table, and talked about mines and gold and troubles with the goblins and the depredations of dragons and lots of other things which he could not understand and did not want to understand, for they sounded much too adventurous, when ding 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 his bell rang again, as if some naughty little hobbit boy was trying to pull the handle off. "Someone at the door," he said, blinking. "Some 4, I should say, by that sound," said Philly. "Besides, we saw them coming along behind us in the distance." The poor little hobbit sat down in the hall and put his head in his hands and wondered what had happened, what was going to happen, and whether they would all stay for supper. Then the bell began to ring again, louder than ever, and he had to run to the door. It was not 4 after all. It was 5. Another dwarf had come along while he was wandering in the hall. He had hardly turned the knob before they were all inside, bowing and saying, "At your service," one after another. Dory, Nori, Ori, Owen, and Glowin were their names, and very soon 2 purple hoods, a grey hood, and a brown hood, and a white hood were hanging on the pegs, and off they marched with their broad hands stuck in their gold and silver belts to join the others. Already it had almost become a throng. Some called for ale, and some called for porter, and one for coffee, and all of them for cakes, so the hobbit was kept very busy for a while. A big jug of coffee had been sat in the hearth, and seed cakes were gone, and the dwarfs were starting on a round of buttered scones, when came a loud knock. Not a ring, but a hard rat-tat-tat on the hobbit's beautiful green door. Somebody was banging with a stick. Bilbo rushed along the passage, very angry, and altogether bewildered and bewuthered. This was the most awkward Wednesday he had ever remembered. He pulled the door open with a jerk, and they all fell in, one on top of the other. More dwarves! 4 more! And there was Gandalf behind, leaning on his staff and laughing. He had made quite a dent on the beautiful door. He had also, by the way, knocked out the secret mark that he put there the morning before. "Carefully, carefully," he said. "It is not like you, Bilbo, to keep friends waiting on the mat, and then open the door like a popgun. Let me introduce Biffer, Buffer, Bomber, and especially Thorin." "At your service," said Biffer, Buffer, and Bomber, standing in a row. Then they hung up 2 yellow hoods and a pale green one, and also a sky blue one with a silver long tassel. This last belonged to Thorin, an enormously important dwarf. In fact, no other than the great Thorin Oakenshield himself, who was not at all pleased at falling flat on Bilbo's mat with Biffer, Bofer, and Bomber on top of him. For one thing, Bomber was immensely fat and heavy. Thorin, indeed, was very haughty, and said nothing about service, but poor Mr. Baggins said he was sorry so many times that at last he grunted, "Pray don't mention it," and stopped frowning. "Now we're all here," said Gandalf, looking at the row of 13 hoods, the best detachable party hoods, and his own hat hanging on the pegs. "Quite a merry gathering. I hope there is something left for the latecomers to eat and drink. What's that? Tea? No, thank you. A little red wine, I think, for me." "And for me," said Thorin. "And raspberry jam and apple tart," said Biffer. "And mince pies and cheese," said Bofer. "A pork pie and salad," said Bomber. "And more cakes, and ale, and coffee, if you don't mind," said all the other dwarves through the door. "Put on a few eggs, there's a good fellow," Gandalf called after him, as the hobbits stumped off to the pantries. "And just bring out the cold chicken and pickles." "Seems to know as much about the inside of my larder as I do myself," thought Mr. Baggins, who was feeling positively flummoxed, and was beginning to wonder whether a most wretched adventure had not come right into his house. By the time he got all the bottles and dishes and knives and forks and glasses and plates and spoons and things piled up on big trays, he was getting very hot and red in the face and annoyed. Confiscate and bother those dwarves," he said aloud. Why don't they come and lend a hand? Lo and behold, there stood Balin and Dwalin at the door of the kitchen, and Philly and Killy behind them, and before you could say knife, they'd whisk away the trays and a couple of small tables into the parlour and set out everything afresh. Gandalf sat at the head of the party, with the 13 dwarves all around, and Bilbo sat on a stool at the fireside, nibbling at a biscuit. His appetite was quite taken away, and trying to look as if this was all perfectly ordinary, and not in the least like an adventure. The dwarves ate and talked, and time got on. At last they pushed their chairs back, and Bilbo made a move to collect the plates and glasses. "I suppose you'll all stay for supper?" he said in his politest, unpressing tones. "Of course," said Thorin. "And after. We shan't get through the business till late. We must have some music first. Now to clear up." Thereupon the 12 dwarves, not Thorin, he was too important, and stayed talking to Gandalf, jumped to their feet, and made tall piles of all the things. Off they went, not waiting for trays, balancing columns of plates, each with a bottle on top, with one hand, while the Hobbit ran after them, squeaking with fright, "Please be careful! Please, don't trouble, I can manage." But the dwarves only started to sing. "Chip the glasses and crack the plates, blunt the knives and bend the forks, that's what Bilbo Baggins hates. Smash the bottles and burn the corks, cut the cloth and tread the fat, pour the milk on the pantry floor, leave the bones on the bedroom mat, splash the wine on every door, dump the crocks in a boiling bowl, pound them up with a thumping pole, and when they've finished, if they are whole, send them down the hole to roll. That's what Bilbo Baggins hates. So carefully with the plates." And of course, they did none of these dreadful things, and everything was cleaned and put away safe and quick as lightning, while the Hobbit was turning around in the middle of the kitchen, trying to see what they were doing. Then they went back and found Thorin with his feet on the fender, smoking a pipe. He was blowing the most enormous smoke rings, and wherever he told one to go, it went. Up the chimney, or behind the clock on the mantelpiece, or under the table, or round and round the ceiling, but wherever it went, it was not quick enough to escape Gandalf. Pop! He sent a smaller smoke ring from his short clay pipe through each one of Thorin's. Then Gandalf's smoke ring would go green and come back to hover around the wizard's head. He had a cloud of them about him already, and in the dim light it made him look strange and sorcerous. Bilbo stood still and watched. He loved smoke rings, and he blushed to think how proud he'd have been yesterday morning of the smoke rings he'd sent up over the hill. "Now for some music," said Thorin. "Bring out the instruments." Killy and Philly rushed for their bags and brought out little fiddles. Dori, Nori, and Ori brought out flutes from somewhere inside their coats. Bomber produced a drum from the hall. Biffer and Bofer went out too, and came back with clarinets that they'd left among the walking sticks. Dwalin and Balin said, "Excuse me, I left mine in the porch." "Just bring mine in with you," said Thorin. They came back with vials as big as themselves, and with Thorin's harp wrapped in a green cloth. It was a beautiful golden harp, and when Thorin struck it, the music began all at once, so sudden and sweet that Bilbo forgot everything else, and was swept away into dark lands, under strange moons, far over the water, and very far from his hobbit hole under the hill. The dark came into the room from the little window that opened in the side of the hill. The firelight flickered. It was April, and they still played on, while the shadow of Gandalf's beard wagged against the wall. The dark filled all the room, and the fire died down, and the shadows were lost, and still they played on. And suddenly, first one and then the other began to sing as they played. Deep-throated singing of the dwarves in the deep places of their ancient homes, and this is like a fragment of their song, if it can be like their song without their music. Far over the misty mountains, cold. To dungeons deep and caverns old we must away ere break of day, to seek the pale enchanted gold. The dwarves of yore made mighty spells, while hammers fell like ringing bells in places deep where dark things sleep, in hollow halls beneath the fells. For ancient king and elvish lord, there many a gleaming golden hoard they shaped and wrought, and light they caught, to hide in gems on hilt of sword. On silver necklaces they strung the flowering stars, on crowds they hung the dragon fire in twisted wire. They meshed the moon and light of sun. Far over the misty mountains cold, to dungeons deep and caverns old we must away ere break of day, to find our long forgotten gold. The pines were roaring on the height, the winds were moaning in the night. The fire was red, it flaming spread, the trees like torches blazed with light. Okay, I'm going to stop there because I can't sing to save my life. There is more song, but we'll continue with the story. As they sang, the hobbit felt the love of beautiful things made by hands and by cunning and by magic and moving through them, a fierce and a jealous love, the desire of the hearts of dwarves. Then something tookish woke up inside him, and he wished to go and see the great mountains, and hear the pine trees and the waterfalls, and explore the caves, and wear a sword instead of a walking stick. He looked out of the window. The stars were out in a dark sky above the trees. He thought of the jewels of the dwarves shining in dark caverns. Suddenly, in the wood beyond the water, a flame leapt up. Probably someone lighting up a wood fire. And he thought of plundering dragons settling on his quiet hill and kindling it all to flames. He shuddered, and very quickly he was playing Mr. Baggins of Bag End under hill again. He got up, trembling. He had less than half a mind to fetch the lamp, and more than half a mind to pretend to, and go and hide behind the beer barrels in the cellar, and not come out again until the dwarves had gone away. Suddenly, he found that the music and the singing had stopped, and they were all looking at him with eyes shining in the dark. "Where are you going?" said Thorin, in a tone that seemed to show that he'd guessed both halves of the hobbit's mind. "What about a little light?" said Bilbo apologetically. "We like the dark," said all the dwarves. "Dark for dark business. There are many hours before dawn. Of course, said Bilbo, and sat down in a hurry. He missed the stool and sat in the fender, knocking over the poker and the shovel with a crash. Hush, said Gandalf. Let Thorin speak. And this is how Thorin began. Gandalf, dwarves, and Mr. Baggins, we are met together in the house of our friend and fellow conspirator, the most excellent and audacious hobbit. May the hair on his toes never fall out. All praise to his wide ale. He paused for breath and for a polite remark from the hobbit, but the compliments were quite lost on poor Bilbo Baggins, who was wagging his mouth in protest at being called audacious, and worst of all, fellow conspirator. Though no noise came out, he was so flummoxed. So Thorin went on. We are met to discuss our plans, our ways, means and policy and devices. We shall soon before the break of day start on our long journey, a journey from which some of us, or perhaps all of us, except our friend and counsellor, the ingenious wizard Gandalf, may never return. It is a solemn moment. Our object is, I take it, well known to us all. To the estimable Mr. Baggins, and perhaps to one or two of the younger dwarves. I think I should be right in naming Killian Filly, for instance. The exact situation at the moment may require a little brief explanation. This was Thorin's style. He was an important dwarf. If he'd been allowed, he probably would have gone on like this until he was out of breath, without telling anyone there anything that was not already known. But he was rudely interrupted. Poor Bilbo couldn't bear any longer. At may never return, he began to feel a shriek coming inside, and very soon it burst out like the whistle of an engine coming out of a tunnel. All the dwarves sprang up, knocking over the table. Gandalf struck a blue light on the end of his magic staff, and in its firework glare the poor little hobbit could be seen kneeling on the hearth rug, shaking like jelly was melting. Then he fell flat on the floor, and kept on calling out, struck by lightning, over and over, and that was all they could get out of him for a long time. So they took him and laid him out of the way on the drawing-room sofa, with a drink at his elbow, and they went back to their business. Excitable little fellow, said Gandalf as they sat down again. Gets funny queer fits, but he is one of the best, as fierce as a dragon in a pinch. If you had ever seen a dragon in a pinch, you will realise that this was not only poetical exaggeration applied to any hobbit, even to old Took's great-granduncle Bullroarer, who was so huge, for a hobbit, he could ride up a horse. He charged the ranks of goblins of Mount Graham in the Battle of the Green Field, and knocked their kin's Gofimble's head clean off with a wooden club. It sailed 100 yards through the air and went down a rabbit hole, and in this way the battle was won and the game of golf was invented at the same moment. In the meanwhile, however, Bullroarer's gentler descendant was reviving in the drawing room. After a while and a drink, he crept nervously to the door of the parlour. This is what he heard, Glowin speaking. Humph! Or some snort like more or less like that. Will he do you think? It is all very well for Gandalf to talk about this hobbit being fierce, but one streak like that in a moment of excitement would be enough to wake the dragon and all his relatives and kill the lot of us. I think it sounded more like fright than excitement. In fact, if it had not been for the sign on the door, I should have been sure we'd come to the wrong house. As soon as I clapped eyes on that little fellow bobbing and puffing on the mat, I had my doubts. He looks more like a grocer than a burglar. Then Mr. Baggins turned the handle and went in. The Took side had won. He suddenly felt he would go without bed and breakfast to be thought fierce. As for little fellow bobbing on the mat, it almost made him really fierce. Many a time afterwards the Baggins part regretted what he did now, and he said to himself, Bilbo, you were a fool. You walked right in and you put your foot in it. Pardon me, he said, if I'd overheard your words that you were saying. I don't pretend to understand what you're talking about, or your reference to burglars, but I think I am right in believing, this is what he called being on his dignity, that you think I'm no good. I will show you. I have no signs on my door. It was painted a week ago, and I'm quite sure you've come to the wrong house. As soon as I saw your funny faces on the doorstep, I had my doubts. But treat it as the right one. Tell me what you want done, and I will try it. If I have to walk from here to the east of East and fight the wild wereworms in the last desert, I had a great-great-great-granduncle once Bull Roarer took, and... Yes, but that was a long time ago, said Glowin. I was talking about you, and I assure you there is a mark on your door, the usual one in the trade, or used to be. Burglar wants a good job, plenty of excitement, and reasonable reward. That's how it usually read. You can say expert treasure hunter instead of burglar if you like. Some of them do. It's all the same to us. Gandalf told us there was a man of the sort in these parts looking for a job at once, and that he had arranged for a meeting here this Wednesday tea time. Of course there's a mark, said Gandalf. I put it there myself, for very good reasons. You asked me to find the 14th man for your expedition, and I chose Mr. Baggins. Just let anyone say I chose the wrong man or the wrong house, and you can stop at 13 and have all the bad luck you like, or go back to digging coal. He scowled so angrily at Glowin that the dwarf huddled back in his chair. When Bilbo tried to open his mouth to ask a question, he turned and frowned at him and stuck out his bushy eyebrows till Bilbo shut his mouth tight with a snap. That's right, said Gandalf. Let's have no more argument. I have chosen Mr. Baggins, and that ought to be enough for all of you. If I say he is a burglar he is, or will be when the time comes. There is a lot more in him than you guess, and a deal more than he has any idea of himself. You may, possibly, all live to thank me yet. Now, Bilbo, my boy, fetch the lamp. Let's have a little light on this. I am not paying attention to the chat. Sorry, guys. I'm more just reading. Hope you're enjoying this. On the table, in the light of a big lamp with a red shade, he spread a piece of parchment rather like a map. This was made by Thor, your grandfather, Thorin, he said in answer to the dwarves' excited questions. It is a plan of the mountain. I don't see how this will help us much, said Thorin disappointingly after a glance. I remember the mountain well enough, and the lands about it. But I know where Mirkwood is, and where the withered heath, where the great dragons bred. There is a dragon marked in red on the mountain, said Balin, but it will be easy enough to find him without that, if we ever arrive there. There is one point that you haven't noticed, said the wizard, and that is the secret entrance. You see that rune on the west side, and the hand pointing to it from the other runes? That marks a hidden passage to the lower halls. Look at the map at the beginning of this book, and you will see that there are runes. It may have been a secret once, said Thorin, but how do we know that this is a secret any longer? Old Smaug has lived there long enough to find out anything there is to know about those caves. He may, but he can't have used it for years and years. Why? Because it was too small. 5 feet high, the door, and 3 may walk abreast, said the runes. But Smaug could not creep into a hole that size, not even when he was a young dragon. Certainly not after devouring so many of the dwarves and men of Dale. Seems like a great big hole to me, squeaked Bilbo, who had no experience of dragons, and only of hobbit holes. He was getting excited and interested again, so he forgot to keep his mouth shut. He loved maps, and in his hall there hung a huge one of the country round, with all his favourite walks marked on it in red ink. How could such a large door be kept secret from everybody outside, apart from the dragon? He asked. He was only a little hobbit, you must remember. In lots of ways, said Gandalf, but in what way this one has been hidden, we don't know without going to see. From what it says on the map, I should guess there is a closed door which has been made to look exactly like the side of the mountain. That is the usual dwarves' method. I think that is right, isn't it?" "Quite right," said Thorin. "Also," went on Gandalf, "I forgot to mention that with the map went a key, a small and curious key. Here it is," he said, and handed Thorin a key with a long barrel and intricate wards made of silver. "Keep it safe." "Indeed I will," said Thorin, and he fastened it upon a fine chain that hung around his neck and under his jacket. Now things begin to look more hopeful. This news alters them much more for the better. So far we had no clear idea of what to do. We thought of going east, as quiet and careful as we could, as far as long as the lake. After that the trouble would begin. "A long time before that, if I know anything about the roads east," interrupted Gandalf. So I'm taking a break to have a drink. "We might go from there up along the river running," went on Thorin, taking no notice, "and so the ruins of Dale. The old town in the valley there, under the shadow of the mountain. But we none of us like the idea of the front gate. The river runs right out of it through the great cliffs at the south of the mountain, and out of it comes the dragon too, far too often, unless he's changed his habits." "That would be no good," said the wizard. "Not without a mighty warrior, even a hero. I tried to find one, but warriors are busy fighting one another in distant lands, and in this neighborhood heroes are scarce, or simply not to be found. Swords in these parts are mostly blunt, and axes are used with trees, and shields as cradles or dish covers, and dragons are comfortably far off, and therefore legendary. This is why I settled on burglary, especially when I remembered the existence of a side door. And here is our little Bilbo Baggins, the burglar, the chosen and selected burglar. So now let's get on and make some plans." "Very well then," said Thorin. "Supposing the burglar expert gives us some ideas or suggestions." He turned with mock politeness to Bilbo. "First, I should like to know a little bit more about things," he said, feeling all confused and a bit shaky inside, but so far still tookishly determined to go on with things. "I mean, about the gold and the dragon and all that, and how it got there, and who it belongs to, and so on and further." "Bless me," said Thorin, "haven't you got a map? And didn't you hear our song? And haven't we been talking about this for hours? All the same, I should like it all plain and clear," said he obstinately, putting on his business manner, usually reserved for people who tried to borrow money of him, and doing his best to appear wise and prudent and professional and live up to Gandalf's recommendation. "Also, I should like to know about risks, out-of-pocket expenses, time required, and remuneration, and so forth," by which he meant, what am I going to get out of it, and am I going to come back alive? "Oh, very well," said Thorin. "Long ago, in my grandfather Thror's time, our family was driven out of the far north, and came back with all their wealth and their tools to this mountain on the map. It had been discovered by my far ancestor, Thrain the Old, but now they mined and they tunnelled and they made huger holes and greater workshops, and in addition, I believe they found a good deal of gold and a great many jewels too. Anyway, they grew immensely rich and famous. My grandfather was king under the mountain again, and treated with great reverence by the mortal men who lived to the south, and were gradually spreading up the running river as far as the valley overshadowed by the mountain. They built the merry town of Dale there in those days. Kings used to send for our smiths, and reward even the least skillful most richly. Fathers would beg us to take their sons as apprentices, and pay us handsomely, especially in food supplies, which we never bothered to grow or find for ourselves. Altogether those were good days for us, and the poorest of us had money to spend and to lend, and leisure to make beautiful things just for the fun of it, not to speak of the most marvellous and magical toys the like of which is not to be found in the world nowadays. So my grandfather's halls became full of armour and jewels and carvings and cups, and the toy market of Dale was the wonder of the north. Undoubtedly, that was what brought the dragon. Dragons steal gold and jewels, you know, from men and elves and dwarves, wherever they can find them, and they guard their plunder as long as they live, which is practically forever unless they're killed, and never enjoy a brass ring of it. Indeed, they hardly know a good bit of work from a bad, though they usually have a good notion of the current market value, and they can't make a thing for themselves, not even mend a little loose scale of their armour. There were lots of dragons in the north in those days, and gold was probably getting scarce up there, with the dwarves flying south or getting killed, and all the general waste and destruction that dragons make going from bad to worse. There was a most specially greedy, strong, and wicked worm called Smaug. One day he flew up into the air and came south. The first we heard of it was a noise like a hurricane coming from the north, and the pine trees on the mountain creaking and cracking in the wind. Some of the dwarves who'd happened to be outside, I was one luckily, a fine adventurous lad in those days, always wandering about, and it saved my life that day. Well, from a good way off we saw the dragon settle on our mountain in a spout of flame, and then he came down the slopes, and when he reached the woods they all went up in fire. By the time all the bells were ringing in Dale and the warriors were arming, the dwarves rushed out of their great gate, but there was the dragon waiting for them. None escaped that way. The river rushed up in steam, and a fog fell on Dale, and in the fog the dragon came on them and destroyed most of their warriors. The usual unhappy story. It was only too common in those days. And then he went back and crept in through the front gate and routed out all the halls and lanes and tunnels and alleys and cellars and mansions and passages. After that there were no dwarves left inside, and he took all their wealth for himself. Probably, for that is the dragon's way. He has it piled all up in a great heap far inside, and sleeps on it for a bed. Later, he used to crawl out of the gate and come by night to Dale, and carry away people, especially maidens, to eat, until Dale was ruined, and with all the people dead or gone. What goes on there now, I don't know for certain, but I don't suppose anyone lives nearer to the mountain than the far edge of the long lake nowadays. The few of us that were still outside and sat and wept in hiding and cursed Smaug, and we were unexpectedly joined by my father and my grandfather with singed beards. They looked very grim and said very little. When I asked how they had got away, they told me to hold my tongue and said that one day in the proper time I should know. After that we went away, and we had to earn our livings as best we could up and down the lands, often enough sinking as low as blacksmith work or even coal mining. But we have never forgotten our stolen treasure, and even now, when I will allow we have a good bit laid by and are not so badly off. Here Thorin stroked the gold chain around his neck. We still mean to get it back, and to bring our curses home to Smaug, if we can. I've often wondered about my father's and my grandfather's escape. I see now they must have had a private side door which only they knew about, but apparently they made a map, and I should like to know how Gandalf got hold of it, and why did it not come to me, the rightful heir. I did not get hold of it, I was given it, said the wizard. Your grandfather Thror was killed, you remember, in the mines of Moria by Azog the Goblin. Curse his name, yes, said Thorin. And Thrain, your father, went away on the 21st of April, 100 years ago, last Thursday, and has never been seen since. True, said Thorin. Well, your father gave this to me, so it gave me this to give to you, and if I have chosen my time and way for handing it over, you can hardly blame me, considering the trouble I had to find you. Your father could not remember his own name when he gave me the paper, and he never told me yours, so on the whole, I think I ought to be praised and thanked. Here it is, said he, handing the map to Thorin. I don't understand, said Thorin, and Bilbo felt like he would like to say the same. The explanation did not seem to explain. Your grandfather, said the wizard slowly and grimly, gave the map to his son for safety before he went to the mines of Moria. Your father went away to try his luck with the map after your grandfather was killed, and lots of adventures of a most unpleasant sort he had, but he never got near the mountain. How he got there I don't know, but I found him a prisoner in the dungeons of the necromancer. Whatever were you doing there? Asked Thorin with a shudder, and all the dwarves shivered. Never you mind. I was finding things out, as usual, and a nasty, dangerous business it was. Even I, Gandalf, only just escaped. I tried to save your father, but it was too late. He was witless and wandering. He'd forgotten almost everything, except the map and the key. We have long ago paid the goblins of Moria, said Thorin. We must give a thought to the necromancer. Don't be absurd. He is an enemy far beyond the powers of all the dwarves put together. If they could all be collected again from the four corners of the world. The one thing your father wished was for his son to read the map and use the key. The dragon and the mountain are more than big enough tasks for you. Hear, hear, said Bilbo, and accidentally said it aloud. Hear what? They all said, turning suddenly towards him, and he was so flustered he answered, Hear what I have got to say. What's that? Well, I should say that you ought to go east and have a look around. After all, there is the side door, and dragons must sleep sometimes, I suppose. If you sit on the doorstep long enough, I dare say you'll think of something. And well, don't you know, I think we've talked long enough for one night, if you see what I mean. What about bed, and an early start and all that? I'll give you a good breakfast before you go. Before we go, I suppose you mean, said Thorin. Aren't you the burglar? And isn't sitting on the doorstep your job? Not to speak of getting inside the door. But I agree about bed and breakfast. I like 6 eggs with my ham. And when starting on a journey, fried, not poached, and mind you don't break them. After all the others had ordered their breakfasts without so much as a please, which annoyed Bilbo very much. They all got up. The Hobbit had to find room for them all, and filled all his spare rooms and made beds on chairs and sofas before he got them all stowed away and went to his own little bed, very tired and not altogether happy. One thing he did make his mind up about was not to bother getting up very early and cook everybody else's wretched breakfast. The tookishness was wearing off, and he was not now quite so sure that he was going on any journey in the morning. As he lay in bed, he could hear Thorin still humming to himself in the best bedroom next to him. Far over the misty mountains cold, to dungeons deep and caverns old, we must away ere break of day, to find a long forgotten gold. And Bilbo went to sleep with that in his ears, and it gave him very uncomfortable dreams. It was long after the break of day when he woke up. Chapter 2, Roast Mutton. How are we getting on, guys? Are we wanting to continue this? We've not even left the Shire. It's a theme with these books, isn't it? It takes so long to get to the actual crux of leaving. I'm happy to go for at least another hour. If you guys want me to. Oh, I hope you guys are enjoying this. I'm okay. Oh, thank you, G. I'm still in this stupid hotel at the moment. Because my flat's uninhabitable right now, so I'm having a lot of trouble with my flat. But things seem to be making progress. But it's Tolkien. It's if you're wondering why I'm doing this, by the way, guys, apart from just being a massive nerd, it is Tolkien reading day today, apparently. So I decided to throw in the Hobbit costume, and read some of the Hobbit. If you've never read The Hobbit, it's a really nice, accessible way to get into Lord of the Rings and get into the Middle-earth world. Right, you guys seem to be enjoying this, so thank you very much for all the gifts and stuff. If you want more like story times, let me know. I did a Scooby-Doo one a few weeks ago, and now we're doing this one. Chapter 2, Roast Mutton. Up jumped Bilbo, and putting on his dressing gown, went into the dining room. There he saw nobody, but all the signs of a large and hurried breakfast. There was a fearful mess in the room, and piles of unwashed crocks in the kitchen. Nearly every pot and pan he possessed seemed to have been used. The washing up was so dismally real that Bilbo was forced to believe the party of the night before had not been part of his bad dreams, as he'd rather hoped. Indeed, he was really rather relieved after all to think that they'd all gone without him, and without bothering to wake him up. But with never a thank you, he thought. And yet, in a way, he could not help feeling just a trifle disappointed. The feeling surprised him. Don't be a fool, Bilbo Baggins, he said to himself. Thinking of dragons and all that outlandish nonsense at your age? So he put on an apron, lit fires, boiled water, and washed up. But he had a nice little breakfast in the kitchen before turning out the dining room. By the time the sun was shining and the front door was open, letting in a warm spring breeze, Bilbo began to whistle loudly and to forget about the night before. In fact, he was just sitting down to a nice little second breakfast in the dining room by the open window when in walked Gandalf. "My dear fellow," said he, "whenever are you going to come? What about an early start? And here you are having breakfast, or whatever you call it, at 10:30. They left you the message because they could not wait." "What message?" said poor Mr. Baggins, all in a fluster. "Great elephants," said Gandalf. "You are not at all yourself this morning. You've never dusted the mantelpiece." "What's that got to do with it? I've had enough to do with washing up for 14. "If you had dusted the mantelpiece, you would have found this just under the clock," said Gandalf, handing Bilbo a note, written, of course, on his own notepaper. This is what it read. "Thorin and company to burglar Bilbo greeting. For your hospitality our sincerest thanks, and for your offer for professional assistance our grateful acceptance. Terms, cash on delivery, up to and not exceeding 1/14 of total profits, if any. All travelling expenses guaranteed in any event, funeral expenses to be defrayed by us or our representatives if occasion arises and the matter is not otherwise arranged for. Thinking it unnecessary to disturb your esteemed response, we have proceeded in advance to make requisite preparations and shall await your respected person at the Green Dragon Inn, Bywater, at 11 a.m. sharp, trusting that you will be punctual. We have the honour to remain yours deeply, Thorin and company." "That leaves you just 10 minutes. You will have to run," said Gandalf. "But," said Bilbo. "No time for it," said the wizard. "But," said Bilbo again. "No time for that either! Off you go!" To the end of his days, Bilbo could not remember how he found himself outside without a hat, a walking stick, or any money, or anything that he could usually took when he went out with him, leaving his second breakfast half finished and quite unwashed up. Pushing his keys into Gandalf's hands and running as fast as his furry feet could carry him down the lane, past the great mill, across the water, and then for a mile or more. Very puffed he was when he got to Bywater, just out on the stroke of 11, and found he had come without a pocket handkerchief. "Bravo!" said Balin, who was standing at the inn door looking out for him. Just then all the others came out round the corner of the road from the village. They were on ponies, and each pony was slung about with all kinds of... Sorry, my nail hurt. All kinds of baggages and packages and parcels and paraphernalia. There was a very small pony, apparently for Bilbo. "Up you two get, and off we go," said Thorin. "I'm awfully sorry," said Bilbo, "but I've come without my hat, and I've left without my pocket handkerchief behind, and I haven't got any money. I didn't get your note until 10:45 to be precise." "Don't be precise," said Dwalin, "and don't worry. You'll have to manage without pocket handkerchiefs and a good many other things before you get to the end of this journey. And as for a hat, I've got a spare hood and a cloak in my luggage." That's how they all came to start, jogging off from the inn one fine morning just before May on laden ponies, and Bilbo was wearing a dark green hood, a little weather-stained, and a dark green cloak borrowed from Dwalin. They were too large for him, and he looked rather comical. What his father Bungo would have thought of him, I daren't think. His only comfort was he couldn't be mistaken for a dwarf, as he had no beard. They had not been riding very long when up came Gandalf, very splendid, on a white horse. He brought a lot of pocket handkerchiefs, and Bilbo's pipe and tobacco. So after the party went along very merrily, and they told stories and sang songs as they rode forward all day, except of course when they stopped for meals. These didn't come quite as often as Bilbo would have liked them, but he still began to feel that adventures weren't so bad after all. At first, they'd passed through Hobbit lands, a wide respectable country inhabited by decent folk, with good roads, an inn or two, and now and then a dwarf or a farmer ambling on by on business. Then they came to lands where people spoke strangely, and sang songs Bilbo had never heard before. Now they had gone far into the lone lands, where there were no people left, no inns, and the roads grew steadily worse. Not far ahead were dreary hills, rising higher and higher, dark with trees. On some of them were old castles with an evil look, as they'd been built by wicked people. Everything seemed gloomy, for the weather that day had taken a nasty turn. Mostly it had been as good as May can be, even in merry tales, but now it was cold and wet. In the lone lands they'd been obliged to camp when they could, but at least it had been dry. "To think it will soon be June," grumbled Bilbo, as he splashed along behind the others in a very muddy track. It was after tea time. It was pouring with rain, and it had been all day, and his hood was dripping into his eyes, his cloak was full of water, his pony was tired and stumbled on stones, the others were too grumpy to talk. "I'm sure the rain has got into the dry clothes and into the food bags," thought Bilbo. "Bother burgling and everything to do with it. I wish I was at home in my nice hole by the fire, with the kettle just beginning to sing." It was not the last time that he wished that. Still, the dwarves jogged on, never turning round or taking any notice of the hobbit. Somewhere behind the grey clouds the sun must have gone down, for it began to get very dark as they went down into a deep valley with a river at the bottom. Wind got up, and willows along its banks bent and sighed. Fortunately, the road went on over an ancient stone bridge, for the river, swollen with the rains, came rushing down the hills and mountains in the north. And it was nearly night when they'd crossed over. The wind broke up the grey clouds, and a wandering moon appeared above the hills between the flying rags. And then they stopped, and Thorin muttered something about supper. "And where shall we get a dry patch to sleep on?" Not until then did they notice that Gandalf was missing. So far, he'd come all the way with them, never saying if he was in the adventure or merely keeping them company for a while. He'd eaten most, talked most, and laughed most. But now, he simply was not there at all. "Just when a wizard would have been most useful too," groaned Dori and Nori, who shared the Hobbit's views about regular meals, plenty and often. They decided in the end that they would have to camp where they were. They moved to a clump of trees, and though it was drier under them, the wind shook the rain off the leaves, and drip, drip was the most annoying. Also, the mischief seemed to have got into the fire. Dwarves can make a fire almost anywhere, out of almost anything, wind or no wind, but they could not do it that night. Not even Owen and Glowin, who were especially good at it. Then one of the ponies took fright at nothing and bolted. He got into the river before they could catch him, and before they could get him out again, Philly and Killy were nearly drowned, and all the baggage that he carried was washed away with them. Of course, it was mostly food, and there was mighty little left for supper, and less for breakfast. There they all sat glum and wet and muttering, while Owen and Glowin went on trying to light the fire and quarrelling about it. Bilbo was sadly reflecting that adventures are not all pony rides in May sunshine, when Balin, who was always their lookout man, said, "There's a light over there." There was a hill some way off with trees on it, pretty thick in parts. Out of the dark mass of the trees they could now see a light shining, a reddish, comfortable-looking light, as if it might be a fire or torches twinkling. When they had looked at it for some while, they fell to arguing. Some said no, and some said yes. Some said they could go and see, and anything was better than little supper, less breakfast, and wet clothes all night. Others said, "These parts are none too well known, and there are too near the mountains. Travellers seldom come this way now. The old maps are no use. Things have changed for the worse, and the road is unguarded. They have seldom even heard of the king around here, and the less inquisitive you are as you go along, the less trouble you're likely to find." Some said, "After all, there are 14 of us." Others said, "Where has Gandalf got to?" This remark was repeated by everybody. Then the rain began to pour worse than ever, and Owen and Glowin began to fight. And that settled it. "After all, we've got a burglar with us," they said. So they made off, leading their ponies with all due and proper caution in the direction of the light. They came to the hill and were soon in the wood. Up the hill they went, but there was no proper path to be seen, such as might lead to a house or a farm. And do what they could, they made a great deal of rustling and crackling and creaking, and a good deal of grumbling and dratting, as they went through the trees in the pitch dark. Suddenly, the red light shone out very bright through the tree trunks not far ahead. "Now it is the burglar's turn," they said, meaning Bilbo. "You must go on and find out all about the light, what it's for, and if it's all perfectly safe and canny," said Thorin to the Hobbit. "Now scuttle off, and come back quick, if all is well. If not, come back if you can. If you can't, hoot twice like a barn owl and once like a screech owl, and we will do what we can." Off Bilbo had to go, before he could explain that he could not even hoot once like any kind of owl, and more than fly like a bat. Or any more than fly like a bat. But at any rate, hobbits can move quickly in woods, absolutely quietly. They take pride in that, and Bilbo had sniffed more than once what he called all this dwarvish racket as they went along, though I don't suppose you or I would have noticed anything at all on that windy night. Not if the whole cavalcade had passed 2 feet off. As for Bilbo walking primly towards the red light, I suppose I don't suppose even a weasel would have stirred a whisker at it. So naturally, he got right up to the fire. For fire it was, without disturbing anyone. And this is what he saw. 3 very large persons sitting around a very large fire of beech logs. They were roasting mutton on long spits of wood and licking the gravy off their fingers. There was a fine, toothsome smell. Also, there was a barrel of good drink at hand, and they were drinking out of jugs. But they were trolls. Obviously, trolls. Even Bilbo, in spite of his sheltered life, could see that. From the great heavy faces of them, and their size, and the shape of their legs, not to mention their language, which was not drawing room fashion at all. At all. Mutton yesterday, mutton today, and blimey if it don't look like mutton again tomorrow, said one of the trolls. Never a blinking bit of man flesh if we had had long enough, said a second. What the hell William was thinking to bring us in these parts at all beats me, and the drink running short what's more, he said, jogging the elbow of William, who was taking a pull at his jug. William choked. Shut your mouth, he said as soon as he could. You can't expect folk to stop here, even just to be eat by you and Bert. You've had a village and a half between you since we come down from the mountains. How much more do you want? And time's been up our way, and we've had thank you, Bill, for a nice bit of fat valley mutton like what this is. He took a big bite of the sheep's leg he was roasting and wiped his lips on his sleeve. Yes, I'm afraid trolls do behave like that, even the ones with only one head each. After hearing all of this, Bilbo ought to have done something at once. Either he should have gone back quietly and warned his friends that there were 3 fair-sized trolls at hand in a nasty mood, quite likely to try roasted dwarf, or even pony for a change, or else he should have done a quick good bit of burgling. A really first-class and legendary burglar would at this point have picked the troll's pockets. It is nearly always worthwhile, if you can manage it, pinch the mutton off the spits, purloin the beer, and walked off without their noticing him. Others, more practical, but with less into each of them with less professional pride, would perhaps have stuck a dagger into each of them before they observed it. Then the night could have been spent cheerily. Bilbo knew it. He had read a good many things he had never seen or done. He was very much alarmed, as well as disgusted. He wished himself 100 miles away, and yet somehow he could not go straight back to Thorin and Company empty-handed. So he stood, and he hesitated in the shadows. Of the various burglarious proceedings he had heard of, picking the troll's pockets seemed the least difficult. So at last he crept behind a tree, just behind William. Bert and Tom went off to the barrel. William was having another drink. Then Bilbo plucked up courage and put his little hand in William's enormous pocket. There was a purse in it, as big as a bag to Bilbo. Ha! Thought he, warming to his new work as he lifted it carefully. This is a beginning. It was. Trolls' purses are the mischief, and this was no exception. Here! Who are you? It squeaked, as it left the pocket, and William turned round at once and grabbed Bilbo by the neck before he could duck behind the tree. Blimey, Bert! Look what I've copped, said William. What is it? Said the others coming up. Let me if I knows. What are you? Bilbo Baggins, a hobbit, said poor Bilbo, shaking all over and wondering how to make owl noises before they throttled him. A hobbit? They said a bit startled. Trolls are slow in the uptake and mighty suspicious about anything new to them. What's a hobbit got to do with my pocket anyways? Said William. And can you cook 'em? Said Tom. You can try, said Bert, picking up a skewer. He wouldn't make a mouthful, said William, who had already had a fine supper. "Not when he is skinned and boned." "Perhaps there are more like him about, and we might make a pie," said Bert. "Here, you, are there any more of your sort sneaking around in the woods here, you nasty little rabbit?" said he, looking up at the Hobbit's furry feet, and he picked him up by the toes and shook him. "Yes, lots," said Bilbo, before he remembered not to give his friends away. No, none at all, not one," he said immediately afterwards. "What do you mean?" said Bert, holding him right way up by the hair this time. "What I say," said Bilbo, gasping, "and please don't cook me, kind sirs. I'm a good cook myself, and cook better than I cook. If you see what I mean, I'll cook beautifully for you, a perfectly beautiful breakfast for you, if only you won't have me for supper." "Poor little blighter," says William. He'd already had as much as supper as he could hold. Also, he had lots of beer. "Poor little blighter, let him go." "Not till he says what he means by lots and none at all," says Bert. "I don't want to have me throat cut in me sleep. Hold his toes in the fire till he talks." "I won't have it. I caught him anyway." "You're a fat fool, William," said Bert, "as I've said afore this evening. And you're a lout." "And I won't take that from you, Bill Huggins," said Bert, and puts his fist in William's eye. And there was a gorgeous row. Bilbo had just enough wits left when Bert dropped him on the ground to scramble out of the way of their feet before they were fighting like dogs, calling one another all sorts of perfectly true and applicable names in very loud voices. Soon they were locked in one another's arms and rolling nearly into the fire, kicking and thumping, while Tom whacked at them both with a branch to bring them to their senses, and that, of course, only made them madder than ever. That would have been the time for Bilbo to have left, but his poor little hobbit feet had been squashed in Bert's big paw, and he had no breath in his body, and his head was going round, so there he lay for a while, panting, just outside the circle of firelight. Right in the middle of the fight, up came Balin. The dwarves had heard noises from a distance, and after waiting for some time for Bilbo to come back, or to hoot like an owl, they started off one by one to creep towards the light as quietly as they could. No sooner did Tom see Balin come into the light than he gave an awful howl. Trolls simply detest the very sight of dwarves uncooked. Bert and Bill stopped fighting immediately and, "A snap! A sack, Tom, quick!" they said, before Balin, who was wondering where in all this commotion Bilbo was, knew what was happening. A sack was put over his head and he was down. "There's more to come yet," said Tom, "or I'm mighty mistook. Lots and none at all it is," he said. "No poor hobbits, but lots of these here dwarves. That's about the shape of it." "I reckon you're right," said Bert, "and we'd best get out of the light." And so they did. With sacks in their hands that they used for carrying off mutton and other plunder, they waited in the shadows. As each dwarf came up and looked at the fire, the spilled jugs and the gnawed mutton, in surprise, pop, went a nasty smelly sack over his head, and he was down. Soon Dwalin lay by Balin, and Filly and Killy together, and Dory, Ori and Nori all in a heap, and Owen and Gloin and Biffer and Bofer and Bomber piled comfortably near the fire. "Thou teach 'em," said Tom, for Biffer and Bomber had given a lot of trouble and fought like mad as dwarves will when cornered. Thorin came last, as he was not caught unawares. He came expecting mischief, and didn't need to see his friend's legs sticking out the sacks to tell him that things were not at all well. He stood outside in the shadows, some way off, and said, "What's all this trouble? Who's been knocking my people about?" "It's trolls," said Bilbo from behind a tree. "They'd forgotten all about them. They're hiding in the bushes with sacks," said he. "Huh, they are," said Thorin, and he jumped forward to the fire before they could leap on him. He caught up a big branch, all on fire at one end, and Bert got that end in his eye before he could step aside. That put him out of the battle for a bit. Bilbo did his best. He caught hold of Tom's leg as well as he could. It was as thick as a young tree trunk, but he was sent spinning up into the top of some bushes when Tom kicked up sparks into Thorin's face. I'll probably get to the end of the Trolls chapter, then I might call it quits, because it is getting late. Tom got the branch in his teeth for that, and one of the front ones. It made him howl, I can tell you. But just at the moment, William came up behind and popped a sack right over Thorin's head and down to his toes. And so the fight ended. A nice pickle they were in now, all neatly tied up in sacks, with 3 angry trolls, and 2 with burns and bashes to remember, sitting by them, arguing whether they should roast them slowly, or mince them fine and boil them, or just sit on them one by one and squish them into jelly. And Bilbo, up in a bush, with his clothes and his skin torn, not daring to move for fear they would hear him. It was just then that Gandalf came back, but no one saw him. The trolls had just decided to roast the dwarves now and eat them later. That was Bert's idea, and after a lot of argument, they'd all agreed to it. "No good roasting them now. It'll take all night," said a voice. Bert thought it was William's. "Don't start that argument all over again, Bill," he said, "or it will take all night." "Who's arguing?" said William, who thought it was Bert who had spoken. "You are. You're a liar," said William, and so argument began all over again. In the end, they decided to mince them, fine, and boil them. So they got a great black pot, and they took out their knives. "No good boiling them. We ain't got no water, and it's a long way to the well and all," said a voice. Bert and William thought it was Tom's. "Shut up," said they, "or we'll never have it done. And you can fetch the water yourself if you say any more." "Shut up yourself," said Tom, who thought it was William's voice. "Who's arguing but you? I'd like to know." "You're a booby," said William. "Booby yourself," said Tom. And so the argument began all over again, and went on hotter than ever, until at last they decided to sit on the sacks one by one and squash them, and boil them next time. "Who shall we sit on first?" said the voice. "Better sit on the last fellow first," said Bert, whose eye had been damaged by Thorin. He thought Tom was talking. "Don't talk to yourself," said Tom. "But if he wants to sit on the last one, sit on him. Which is he?" "The one with the yellow stockings," said Bert. "Nonsense, it's the one with the grey stockings," said a voice like William's. "I made sure it was yellow," said Bert. "Yellow it was," said William. "And then what did you say grey for?" said Bert. "I never did. Tom said it." "That I never did," said Tom. "It was you." 2 to 1, so shut your mouth," said Bert. "Who are you talking to?" said William. "Now stop it," said William and Bert together. "The night's getting on. The dawn comes early. Let's get on with it." "Dawn take you all, and we stone to you," said a voice that sounded like William's. But it wasn't. Just at that moment, the light came over the hill, and there was a mighty twitter in the branches. William never spoke, for he stood turned to stone as he stooped, and Bert and Tom were stuck like rocks as they looked at him. And there they stand to this day, all alone, unless the birds perch on them, for trolls, as you probably know, must be underground before dawn, or they go back to the stuff of the mountains that they're made of, and never move again. That is what happened to Bert and Tom and William. "Excellent," said Gandalf, as he stepped from behind a tree and helped Bilbo to climb down out of a thorn bush, and then Bilbo understood. It was the wizard's voice that kept making the trolls bicker and quarrel, until the light came and made an end of them. The next thing was to untie the sacks and let out the dwarves. They were nearly suffocated and very annoyed. They had not at all enjoyed lying there listening to the trolls making plans for roasting them and squashing them and mincing them. They had to hear Bilbo's account of what happened to him twice over before they were satisfied. "Silly time to go practicing pinching and pocket picking," said Bomber, "when what we wanted was fire and food. And that's just what you wouldn't have got if those fellows without a struggle in any case, said... Oh, sorry. And that's just what you wouldn't have got. Those fellows without a struggle in any case, said Gandalf. Anyhow, you're wasting time now. Don't you realize the trolls must have a cave or a hole dug somewhere near to hide from the sun in? We must look into it. They searched about and soon found the marks of trolls' stony boots going away for the trees. They followed the tracks up the hill until, hidden by bushes, they came on a big door of stone leading to a cave. But they could not open it, not though they all pushed while Gandalf tried various incantations. Would this be any good? Asked Bilbo, when they were getting tired and angry. I found it on the ground where the trolls had their fight. He held out a largish key, though no doubt William had thought it very small and secret. It must have fallen out of his pocket, very luckily, before he was turned to stone. Why on earth didn't you mention it before? They cried. Gandalf grabbed it and fitted it into the keyhole, and the stone door swung back with one big push, and they all went inside. There were bones on the floor and a nasty smell in the air. But there was a good deal of food jumbled carelessly on shelves and on the ground, among an untidy litter of plunder, of all sorts from brass buttons to pots full of gold, coins standing in a corner. There were lots of clothes too, hanging on the walls, too small for trolls. I'm afraid they belonged to victims. Among them were several swords of various makes, shapes and sizes. Two caught their eyes particularly, because of their beautiful scabbards and jewelled hilts. Gandalf and Thorin each took one of these, and Bilbo took a knife in a leather sheath. It would have made only a tiny pocket knife for a troll, but it was as good as a short sword for a hobbit. These look like good blades, said the wizard, half drawing them and half looking at them curiously. They were not made by any troll, nor any smith among men in these parts and days. But when we can read the runes on them, we shall know more about them. Let's get out of this horrible smell, said Philly. So they carried out the pots of coins and such food as was untouched and looked fit to eat, also one barrel of ale, which was still full. By the time they felt like breakfast, and being very hungry, they did not turn their noses up at what they got from the trolls' larder. Their own provisions were very scanty. Now they had bread and cheese and plenty of ale, and bacon to toast in the embers of the fire. After that they slept, for their night had been disturbed, and they did nothing more till the afternoon. Then they brought up their ponies and carried away the pots of gold, buried them very secretly not far from the track by the river, putting a great many spells over them just in case they ever had the chance to come back and recover them. And when that was done, they all mounted once more and jogged along again on the path towards the east. "And where did you go, if I may ask?" said Thorin to Gandalf as they rode along. "To look ahead," said he. "And what brought you back in the nick of time?" "Looking behind," said he. "Exactly," said Thorin. "But could you be more plain?" "I went to spy out our road. It will soon become dangerous and difficult. Also, I was anxious about replenishing our small stock of provisions. I had not gone very far, however, when I met a couple of friends of mine from Rivendell." "Where's that?" asked Bilbo. "Don't interrupt," said Gandalf. "You will get there in a few days now, if we're lucky, and find out all about it. As I was saying, I met two of Elrond's people. They were hurrying along for fear of the trolls. It was they who told me that 3 of them had come down from the mountains and settled in the woods not far from the road. They had frightened everyone away from the district, and they waylaid strangers. I immediately had a feeling that I was wanted back. Looking behind, I saw a fire in the distance and made for it. So now you know. Please be more careful next time, or we shall never get anywhere." "Thank you," said Thorin. I think we'll leave it there. We're about to go into chapter 3. But we've just made it past the trolls, and they've received their swords. So Bilbo's just received Sting, although it's not received its name yet. So I hope you enjoyed my Tolkien Reading Day live stream, where we got through 2 chapters. Was that all? Jesus. We got through 2 chapters of The Hobbit. If you guys want me to continue this, let me know, and I'm sure I could throw on the Hobbit costume, but we're getting quite late now into the day. I am in a hotel at the moment because my flat's uninhabitable right now, so I don't want to disturb the people next to me. But thank you very much for joining, guys. I'm just going to have a little peek at the chat. Right. Is anyone saying anything? Thank you so much, guys. Yeah, I thought I would throw in the costume. Because, might as well go the full hog. Let's just have a look. Well, you guys really seem to enjoy this. And you guys seem to really enjoy the Scooby-Doo Storytime live stream. So maybe I should do more story times. Do you guys want me to continue this? Do you want me to make this a thing over the next few days? We sit down and do more of The Hobbit? Is that something you'd be interested in? Just remember, if you do like our live streams, we do a live stream every single Sunday. We do a live stream cosplay quiz. William, Nick, and I do it. So this week is The Simpsons. So that'll be tomorrow night. So please join us for that, guys. If you would like to... Do you think Sting had a greater part in greater history? Do you mean like in the same way that Glamdring and Orcrist did? I don't know, because it never gets a name other than what Bilbo calls it. So again, I mean, the very fact that it's clearly made with the same kind of elvish magic and the sort of infusion of elvish spirit, because it does obviously glow blue in the same way that particular crafts from elvish lore do. I think you'd have to talk to someone who knew more about Tolkien, but basically, it's just considered like a knife rather than anything particularly special, but the fact that it does have that incantation means it clearly had some use to it. Like, it clearly had some reverence given to it, and it was infused by some of the elvish lore and elvish magic. So, it's not like it was just a throwaway weapon, even before Bilbo got it. But yeah, I hope you guys are enjoying your Tolkien reading day. Let me know if you've read any Tolkien stuff. I've been watching a lot of Tolkien YouTube breakdowns, like Tolkien Untangled and Men of the West, things like that. So those are really good. But yeah, please join us tomorrow night for The Simpsons. I'll be announcing the other themes at some point. But things are a little bit rough at the moment for me, and for William, to be honest. So, in my situation, I am currently out of my flat, so I'm currently in a hotel. So I had to go back to my flat to get this costume tonight. So I hope you appreciate the effort that I went to go get the costume, bring it back to the hotel so I could read this to you. That's why this live stream was so late in the night. But yeah, it would be nice to sit and read some more. I might maybe do some more Monday night. If you want to hear more, would you guys want to hear more of The Hobbit on Monday night? Maybe try and get to Rivendell. At some point, the chapter I'm really looking forward to reading is the one with Gollum, Riddles in the Dark. But I felt like just skipping right to that chapter is kind of cheating. So we can make this a regular thing. Okay, cool. Right, I'll try and remember. I've got drama rehearsals on Monday night, but I'll try and remember once drama rehearsals are done to come back and we can do some more of this. Yeah? Okay. Sounds good. Thank you very much, guys. I'm going to call it quits just because we are nearing 11 o'clock and I'm in a hotel, so I don't want to be too noisy. You're from Govan. I'm from Edinburgh. So Govan. Oh yes, right. Okay. Yeah, no, I'm Edinburgh based. But yes, if you want more live stream content, please follow the Scottish Scooby Gang account. In fact, if you guys are in a position to do so, we could really do with your help right now. Just I'm out of my flat right now, which is living in a hotel, so that can be quite expensive. So we could really do with your help. We do have a coffee set up, ko-fi/Scottish Scooby Gang. And if you guys can support us on that, it means we can get more costumes for our live stream quizzes. My neighbours had a leak that they didn't fix in 4 months. Even though they knew about it, they didn't have insurance, and eventually my insurance had to pay for it to get it fixed. So that, because the people downstairs from me in my flat are also homeless. Thanks to my shitty neighbours. So we could really do with your help right now, guys. Please support us on Coffee, because this April, I'll be announcing the quiz themes for April, and obviously we dress up and put on costumes for every single theme. But that can be really expensive, and right now we're not really in a position where we can afford that, so the costumes may be a bit more like hodgepodge than we would like. But if you guys support us, then we can, look to, investing in this account and this channel more and getting more regular content. Like at the moment, we've just been focusing on doing our weekly live streams. But I really want to do more actual content on the account, more sketches, things like that. But it's just not been possible because I'm in a hotel, so I don't have access to all my costumes. I have to go back every time I want a costume. So things are a bit tough right now, if I'm honest. But that's why I came on tonight, try and cheer myself up and entertain you guys and read some Hobbit. We also have an Instagram, if you are interested, which is Scottish Scooby Gang. I think that's everything. There's also a subscribe function on these live streams, if you're willing to subscribe on this live stream. Oh, it's miserable. That sucks. I'm really sorry that happened to you. Is it all fixed now? Well, thank you very much for joining, and thank you for the follow. Your username is just a bunch of letters, so I can't read it. Yes, I can finally go back to work. Thank God. Yeah, luckily I'm still working, because they put me up in a hotel. It was near enough to work. Well, the bed is not very comfortable, so I'm in a lot of pain at the moment. I've got a bad back. I have metal rods in my spine, so my back is very sensitive at the best of times. Right, I'm going to call it quits. I'm pretty tired, guys. Thank you for joining.